The world for a Friday afternoon. This is the Voice of Reason. My name's Alex Belfield with an unexpected pop-up this afternoon that again leaves you sad and speechless. It is a sad day for democracy and humanity today as we see another MP has been stabbed and a life is lost. Sir David was attacked just after midday at his constituency in a Methodist church. A man has been arrested. For 2 hours they tried to save his life and he was pronounced dead by the police and announced publicly just over 20 minutes ago. This is an MP who has spent his life dedicated to his constituency, and whenever he found himself in Parliament, he was always the first to talk about Essex and Leigh-on-Sea and the people who live there. We are not going to speculate during this live broadcast about what has happened and who did it and why they did it or anything like that. I want to focus on democracy and how we maintain democracy, how we make sure that this doesn't happen again. We saw with the Joe Cox appalling tragedy just a couple of years ago that the impact that an individual can have on an entire country is phenomenal. And it is just shocking to think that this could happen in 2021, a year when we think we're smarter than everyone else, a year when we've had enough, we've got enough to deal with, and now we see that this is now piled on. A tragedy that should never have happened. The police have arrested a man, and we won't be discussing that for legal reasons, but what we will discuss is where we go as a country. As we sit here on a Friday afternoon, it is 3:30. I welcome Andrew Bridgen MP, a man not dissimilar to Sir David, who loves the people and loves being amongst the people and has spent his career talking to and being with them. But there comes a risk that when you are with the people, it can go tragically wrong, as it has today. Andrew, thank you for joining us. Tell me about Sir David. What was he like as a human being?
He's quite a character. And when I arrived 12 years ago, almost in the House of Commons, he was already one of the old school. He'd already served as an MP for more than 20 years. Someone you see perform in the chamber who clearly loved his constituency, loved being an MP, loved his constituents, and he shoehorned, as you've mentioned, his Essex constituency of Southend West into almost every question he ever asked in the chamber, much to the amusement of colleagues that obviously they knew that would be good for a soundbite for the local media or the local paper. A hard-working MP who spoke in debates and people listened to what he'd got to say given his experience in the House. One of the longest serving MPs in this Parliament. And I don't know, I think to have loved his job, loved the constituency and loved the constituents that much, he's given his life to public service. And I don't know where this takes us. I remember the Joe Cox situation, which was horrendous, and then people don't want to do surgeries, and I just wonder, if MPs are accused of being out of touch, if we restrict how we interact with our own constituents, the people we're elected to represent, how can we represent them properly in Parliament? And it's a conundrum that I don't think you can square. I don't see how democracy can function if we can't meet the people we're supposed to represent. And with that, unfortunately, comes a risk. And it appears to be an incident that's happening more and more often.
What we have to try and do is protect you as a member of Parliament. And as you say, it's almost impossible to do so because your job is to be public. That is your job, isn't it? To be amongst the constituents, and it only takes one bad egg. The problem is these eggs seem to become more and more prevalent, and the risk seems to become greater. We know he was stabbed many times. This wasn't therefore an accident. This clearly was an intended targeted attack, and we should see it as such. But again, from your position now, does this make you question your job? Does it make you wonder whether this is something you want to pursue? Because you put yourself out there as a public person, and this is the risk that you take, isn't it?
I think people have to accept that is the risk. I think it's probably my wife that worries about it, probably more than I do. I will be going to a constituency event this evening. I'm booked in to go and speak, and I'll go and speak. That's my job. But I mean, the world's a darker place this afternoon than it was this morning after this. As anyone as any of your viewers would think, if they had a work colleague who was doing the same job as them, who was murdered while carrying out their job.
I know there's a lot of talk online.
He was a very liked person. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't seem, he was universally respected across the chamber. I don't know. We can't speculate on the reason behind all of this. I'm sure some of it will come out in due course through the police investigation and announcements. But there is no excuse or mitigation for this sort of behaviour. He's a long-standing, hard-working MP doing his job, meeting his constituents, trying to sort out their problems for them, and he's for doing his job and serving his community and being a good MP. He's paid the ultimate sacrifice. He's paid with his life, and I just feel so tragically sorry for his wife and 5 children.
And he wasn't particularly controversial. I mean, that's what's alarming. You wouldn't think of all the people.
He was on the right of the party. He was a religious man. He's a Catholic. He was very much for animal welfare. He was a Brexiteer, but he wouldn't have been considered a firebrand Brexiteer as perhaps I would be. No, he was, a very, very hard-working MP, a model of a sort of constituency MP, a man who'd never been made a minister, and was happy to contribute from the back benches. It's pretty devastating, quite honestly, and it's going to deter some people from wanting to enter politics. That's not good. You need as wide a pool of talent as you possibly can, as you often point out, Alex. We need talent in the House of Commons. It's a really important job. And I don't know, the politics is all polarised. People tend to be mostly either they're completely for you or they're completely against you. There's very, very little middle ground nowadays. And I think, I'm feeling a bit emotional, but I don't think when senior members of the opposition, who will remain nameless, only a few weeks ago, call people names.
Well, I was going to bring that up. I mean, Angela Rayner is coming for quite a lot of stick online at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think calling people... I've never called one of my political opponents any of those sort of anything. It's not a way to carry on. And I wonder what she's thinking now. She needs to look into her conscience.
Well, I think when you use words like scum and sort of generically throw that at a group of people, A, it's unnecessary, and B, it's unfair and it's unedifying in her position. I mean, if you're someone like me who is commentating from the outside, maybe there's a justification that you can have strong opinions, but when you're on a team and you are on the political team, maybe now is not the time to be so divided. Maybe we need to now see that politics is one and it is there for the people. You are public servants there for us, whichever side you're on. And I think that's sort of been lost amongst all the vitriol, hasn't it?
And also, I mean, I'll point out, and I know that David Amess would have done this, and it's this is exactly how it is. We fight the elections. The candidate with the most votes gets elected. They become the MP, for better or worse. I have never asked anyone who's come to me with a problem, which way did you vote at the election? It would never make any difference if they told me they didn't vote for me. Obviously, about 25% of the people I help in my constituency surgeries, they don't actually vote. But I'm their MP, and it's my job to represent them. And if they've got a problem, I will do my very best, regardless of whoever they voted for at the last election, or the one before, or the one before that, or whether they didn't vote at all. That's our job, is to try and do our very best to sort out the problems that they've got, regardless of political affiliations, and that's what MPs do.
Well, I've never met a fighter more brave than you, a more outspoken public speaker who is willing to defend the people, and I thank you for that. We were planning on talking this afternoon at 5 o'clock before this broke about a week in politics, which has been absolutely extraordinary. For those who don't know, Andrew Bridgen MP is there in Leicestershire, which has been hugely controversial this week. I want to talk, if we may, for a moment respectfully about Claudia Webb, who, again, we have to set the line. I beg your pardon. We have to put the line in the sand, don't we, and say that some behaviour is not acceptable. And I think it's important right now to see what's happened today and say, look, Keir Starmer has to make a point about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, what is deemed okay politically or privately, and especially today of all days, now realise that you can't allow people to be in your party, whether it be a Vaz, whether it be Webb or anyone else, who is going to have such controversy around them that for anybody else would be a sackable offence. It seems like politics is protecting its own, similar to the BBC. This is such a powerful week. We've seen so much happen, from the report into COVID, which has affected so many millions of businesses and people's lives and families and elderly people, and then the court case with Webb, and now this. It's profound, isn't it?
I think you've seen the two extremes of Parliament, its best and its worst this week. You've got Claudia Webb, who's a relatively newly elected MP in Leicester East, and I do feel for the constituents in Leicester East. They had Keith Vaz for 32 years, and people will say they voted for him, and that the people deserve the MPs they get. I don't know who deserved Keith Vaz to represent them. He's left a legacy of problems in Leicester East, of modern slavery, exploitative working practices, organised crime. He was replaced at the last election after I forced him to stand down by Claudia Webb, who was parachuted in from London. She's an Islington councillor. She was in court this week. She was being found guilty of harassment of another lady. It was completely unedifying. The judge basically said, "I don't believe a word that you said in the witness box." She's currently got the same letters after her name as I have. I find it deeply disappointing at that sort of behaviour. She should resign now, having brought disgrace on the House of Commons and her constituents in Leicester East. She won't at the moment. And the bad
news is... Can I ask why you think not? Because this is fascinating to me. This woman is accused of threatening to throw acid over a woman's face, threatening to release private images to children, making silent phone calls. I mean, this isn't any old harassment. This is as bad as I've heard.
I think it was 16 calls, and she'd had a warning from the police to desist from doing this, but she continued to do it. It is unacceptable behaviour. She's been found guilty. She claims that she's going to appeal. That will drag out the process.
So she's just going to bleed us of money in the process, because while she's suspended, which she's being paid, right?
She's going to I don't think Claudia Webb's got an offer of a better paid job than being an MP. If I want to be cynical, I think she'll drag it out as long as she can. If she has an appeal process, she will continue to be paid. Then unless she gets a custodial sentence of more than 12 months, the constituency will have to do a recall on her. That will take at least 2.5 months. So we could be 8 or 9 months before there'll be a by-election started in Leicester East, but that's what we need. And the bad news is that I'm well aware from my contacts in the city that Keith Vaz is putting it about that he's going to be the candidate, or Labour might lose the seat. The fact that Keith Vaz, following the rent boy and cocaine scandal, and then following on only a couple of weeks ago where he'd failed to engage with the harassment and bullying investigation, which he's been completely, they called him his behaviour should be ashamed of his behaviour, and he's now been banned from ever having a parliamentary pass and coming on the premises. The fact that he thinks that he's a fit person to stand again for election in Leicester East, well, quite honestly, we haven't sorted out cleaning up the remnants of his last incumbency.
Do you take some responsibility, I'm talking you as a politician, not as Andrew Bridgen, that the public are losing faith because of things like this? I mean, the notion that a woman who has been accused and found guilty of these appalling things that didn't just a bit overstep the line are to most people completely unfathomable and deranged. How is she
and won't
even a...
won't accept the verdict of a judge, and
No,
claims that she's going to appeal against it. And she was shocked at the verdict.
but I suppose the question is, why hasn't Keir sacked her in any other walk of life?
Well, he has. Give him his due. He has removed the whip from her, so she's now officially in the newspapers the ex-Labour MP standing as an independent. What shocks me is that, given everything that Keith Vaz has done, he's still a member of the Labour Party. If he'd been a Conservative, I promise you, and this is not being partisan, his feet would not have touched the ground as he left the party after the cocaine and rent boys scandal coming out, let alone the bullying
worse still, he's part
of
of
a
a
female member of
constituency.
staff at Parliament who was forced to resign.
But Andrew, aside from his private life, which is just totally embarrassing at the very least, unedifying in the middle, and shameful at worst, if we look at what he's chosen to ignore, and I keep banging on about it here, that with the BLM lot, that the one place in Britain that the BLM lot should be is Leicester, because of those modern day slaves, of which there could be up to 10,000 still earning £2 to £3 an hour. He's turned a blind eye. I don't believe he's done anything about it.
He didn't, and all that developed in the 32 years that he was the MP, the sweatshops and the exploitation of workers. And we're now on the situation where, to get around the minimum wage requirements, they're forcing the staff to bring half their wages back to work and hand it over in cash after they're paid.
Where do we go?
And that's still going on today. And Vaz never raised any of this ever. The sweatshops, the exploitation of workers, the modern slavery, the illegal migrants. He never raised any of that in the 32 years that he was the MP there. But then neither has the Labour-controlled City Council. So my view is that we've seen the very best of MPs, and we've seen the worst. We've seen an MP today who's lost his life doing his job and trying to look after his constituents, and we've got an MP that's brought us into disrepute again. And you say that you're losing faith, and people are losing faith. Alex, I'm losing faith in the situation, to be honest.
We see breaking news that Boris Johnson and Home Secretary Priti Patel are on their way back to London, so they should. They need to be there, and in fact go to Leon C would be my recommendation, that they should show their face in respect of what has happened today. As we move forward tonight into tomorrow, how do we move on? And how does politics rebuild? Because I'm sick of platitudes. I'm sick of the notion that nobody's ever to blame. There will be some kind of mea culpa, I'm sure, and there'll be some defense which is indefensible. I don't think there is any justification ever whatsoever under any circumstances for anything like this. How do we rebuild? Where do we find the faith? This happened in a church.
And Sir David Amess was a good man. I mean, when you look at the definition of a good man, a few minutes in his company, and you knew he was a good man with a good heart and good intent. He may not have, as I don't. I mean, not everyone agrees with my political views, but I mean, I hope they understand that, what I'm trying to get society to is general improvement for everybody. And he was that. Democracy will go on. It has to go on. But I mean, it's a darker place than it was this morning, and I think this is going to deter people from wanting to get into politics and public life. That's a bad thing, because the only people left who want to stay in it are the people you probably don't want to be in it, the ones who just want the power. And, it's a sad day for democracy. And if this means that MPs are less likely to engage with their constituents, then democracy loses out. Because, when we're in London all week, when Parliament's sitting, we're surrounded by people with submachine guns, ultimate security getting in and out of the building. There's lots of places where only MPs are allowed to go. The public aren't allowed there. There's police everywhere, and it's so oppressive, but that's how it has to be. And then we get in our cars and we get away from there and come back. And
so I guess that's symbolic then. They're protecting the building.
And now if you're not safe in your constituency, this is no life, to be honest. And you can't do your job if I can't go around and speak to my constituents and say, what do you think about what the government's doing? What do you like? What don't you like? How's this bit of legislation affecting you? what are your views on this? If I can't do that, how can I act and represent my constituents?
No, and what you're saying is that security is symbolic about the building, not the people, because the second you leave it, you're high and dry and walking around alone.
And I sigh of relief when I get in the car and drive away, because it feels like freedom. Well, I mean, if you've got to be looking over your shoulder all the time, you're in your own constituency, which is my home. It's where I was brought up, with the people I was brought up with.
Yes.
That's my home. That's not much of a life, Alex.
Well, I'm so sorry to you, to your colleagues, mostly to his close family and friends. As you say, this is a devastated population of people, professionally and privately, who will not be able to reconcile what has happened, because it doesn't make sense. No words matter. No platitudes should be given. There should be no excuses. There should be no defense. And we need to get to the bottom of it. It once again underscores that this country is under attack. And what we have to find a way of doing is protecting those who are trying to do things for the greater good, like he was this morning in that church. We have to try and find a unity between us, and we need to stop things like this happening again. How we do that is bewildering and overwhelming, because it's an infinite task, isn't it? That's the problem. Tomorrow is another day.
Well, I'll leave you with one thought, which I think was an American politician many hundreds of years ago, and he said that you have to remember that the tree of democracy has to be watered with the blood of martyrs on a regular basis. Well, it's been watered again today, hasn't it?
Andrew Bridgen, MP, thank you very much for joining me. We are celebrating the life, in a way, of Sir David, who should never have been taken today. He died in the church where he was having his local surgery. There was an air ambulance waiting to take him, but he was too poorly. After 38 years of service, he's passed away today, leaving a devastated family and colleagues like Andrew Bridgen, MP. As a guy who sits here every day trying to make sense of the world, there is no making sense of this situation. There is no words that will give any consolation, because it shouldn't happen, and it's happened again. And what lessons have we learned? Probably nothing is the truth. We will find out what happened and why it happened, but what do we do about it? And I guess this is life. But what an unnecessary end to a brilliant life, a brilliant career, a man who served his public just selflessly. And as far as I can see, was never tainted, had nothing but praise around him, nothing but love and support around him, and a constituency who adored him. And one man today arrested who took his life. It's a very sad day for our humanity and democracy. Thank you to Andrew Bridgen, MP, for talking to us. I wanted to bring you this live pop-up, and maybe we'll do a phone-in later. There's no point talking the talk at this point, because we're not going to speculate. And there's nothing we can say. All we do is send our love to the family of Sir David, and also to his colleagues and friends who are in mourning and have every right to be angry and have every right to demand answers. We will bring you those answers, if any are given today. But we leave you with this interview with Andrew Bridgen, MP, and we thank him for his time. This is The Voice of Reason. My name's Alex Belfield for a Friday afternoon.